Yes, and this is also an opportunity for all of the panelists to remember what they forgot to say and say it now. So the more the better. So yes, absolutely. We'll start with Hallie.
Uh, I want to say those photographs that I showed you, that was weeks and weeks of trying to find photos in different drawers in different parts of my house. And where's that scrapbook up on that shelf? And I really want to thank Marcelina Martin, whose photography you saw, but I was like sending her, can you scan this? Can you take a photo of this? So I found this other one over here. So thank you, Marcelina, and for all your beautiful work over the years. I wanted to say that. I also wanted to say that all the images that I gathered from different cultures all over the world for the Heart of the Goddess, they are in a video, which I have online. So I have these cards up there on the table with my books with beautiful music by Jennifer Barazan. So it's 8 minutes of just immersing yourselves in a meditation of the images of the sacred feminine. And I also wanted to say, these are, as we know, extraordinary times and calls on us to become even more extraordinary than we have been and we are now. So that's my hope in this incredible gathering, which I was saying to Maureen, I feel like we're all these different parts of a being that have been doing out for the last, half a century or whatever, doing these different parts. And we've come back together right here in this moment, all of us, to see where we're headed now and to celebrate.
Hi, Maureen Hansen. I had the pleasure of being in Berkeley from 1975 to 1979, and it was really one of the thrills of my lifetime to be in the right place at the right time. And I was in graduate theological school, studying for the Unitarian ministry, and I spent my 4 years at the Graduate Theological Union studying the goddess. Because it was just, I couldn't believe that I had been a well-educated person and I had never heard of the goddess before. I couldn't believe I made it to theological school and some radicals at the school began teaching about the goddess. And I went through a long stage of grief about how much had been lost. How much had been lost, and how did we find that authentic archetypal feminine again? And realizing, we find it with each other by talking about our own experiences. We find it in our dreams. We find it in artwork. But I wanted to name the grief at feeling that all that had been taken away, and how arduous it was, but also joyous it was to begin to reclaim that. And part of the reclamation for me in Berkeley at that time was the music. Hallie Near was singing. I'm forgetting. Yeah, Chris Williamson was singing. And we'd go to these concerts, and there'd be all these thousands and thousands of women in the room singing, Lean on Me, I Am Your Sister, and just talking about this whole movement that we were involved in. The music was a very bonding part of the movement for me. And then the last piece that I just want to name was how profound Mary Daly's Beyond God the Father was for me. A real groundbreaking book. So thank you each for all the dimensions of the goddess that you brought in today. I really appreciate it.
I want to piggyback on what you just said, Maureen, about the grief, because Carol Christ, I forget who mentioned, I guess Charlene did, she left the States to move to Lesbos because of the grief of trying to live in such a patriarchal culture. And I went on pilgrimage with her, and we went into the caves. This is in Crete, and the mountain shrines, and where the people who live in Crete still go into the caves to pray for childbirth. I mean, the culture is still alive. And Carol died this last year, I guess it was. Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure we brought her into the room. So thank you for mentioning the grief.
Thank you. So I have two questions. One, I received my master's degree from Antioch, and one of the professors there stated that Merlin Stone had been discredited. And I was wondering, maybe not to get into a whole political thing, but if you could just share a little bit about that. Discredited. I knew there was a lot of political stuff, but I was just wondering if you could share something.
I'll respond to that, but this is not following that path, but I think it may supersede it all. I don't know if you remember this, but when we were at the conference at Santa Cruz, all we presenters were staying at a place together. And Merlin said that when she was first doing the research for When God Was a Woman, she was going to the British Library and finding all these books. And she was reading these books, and it was midnight. Her husband was asleep next to her, and she was reading one of these books, and she saw these men come in the room and say, "Put down those books." And she realized how important what she was doing was.
Anyway, I haven't heard that, but she was a sculptor. She was an artist, and she did all that research in the British libraries and elsewhere. And she made a strong case. Other books have been written about that now. Sarah the Priestess, but Merlin did not footnote anything in the book. That's what drives people crazy. It's as I say, you can see the research of what she's talking about in other people's books. But her book, When God Was a Woman, which came out first in England in 1975, and then in the United States in 1977, and did get a lot of reviews. I asked her why she didn't do that. I mean, I'm coming out of a background of scholarship, and how could you do all that work and not have any endnotes? But, it's the way she did it. So it makes her vulnerable to those kinds of hits. But I don't see how you could say that what she said was happening then didn't happen, I mean, there were the indigenous people, and then the Indo-European tribes come in with the sky god. It's kind of a story we've heard before all over southeastern Europe and around the Mediterranean. Fits right in.
Oh. Thank you. Yeah, the professor asked me to remove her citations from my project. Yeah. And I'm like, well, I can't argue with it now. I'm too busy, but I wanted to hear more. Yeah. And then I don't want to be a hog, but I just had one other question. So separating the feminine politically from nature, do you mind commenting on that? Obviously, it's not going very well. Right. You talked about the political movement and this kind of the feminists wanting to remove the divine.
They bought the patriarchal dualism from the Pythagorean table of opposites. It's been around for quite a while. It wasn't only postmodernism. So between culture and nature. And as I say, this influenced all of Western culture, in the table of opposites, which wasn't made by Pythagoras, it was his followers and next generations. But, this culture, nature is on this changing side. The unchanging, the male is good. The female goes through these periods and it's changing, that's bad, like nature. It's just not as superior. So, it's like an old shtick, but it just when I said it really captured the thinking of the field of archaeology in the 90s, I meant really, should have said all of academia. And, you know, there were these little pockets of ecofeminists and say, what do you, can't you see this is, part of the patriarchal structure of thinking and control? And, but, and before that, there was a feminist book in anthropology. Can't think of the name of it. 3 women did it together. It was early on in the 70s. And they said, this is how it is. Man is to culture as woman is to nature. So, it got cemented into most of academia and probably still is.
To me, the whole point of the feminist spirituality movement is ultimately moving towards oneness. And we can be endlessly following the dualities, but I think we get kind of mesmerized by them. We can get mesmerized by them, and they work. They get us away from the oneness. I mean, maybe looking at the dualities is a way to look at the oneness, but it's the oneness it's what I said. These aren't just feminine qualities or masculine qualities. They're human nature. This is human nature, and we want to unite.
I just want to add, as I said in that article I told you about in the Brooklyn Rail, people say, oh, you ecofeminists think, women are associated with nature sort of inherently. I said, yeah, we think everyone should feel associated with nature. That's really the problem of modern culture with that break from nature. To be important and civilized is to be, of course, not female and not nature. So it should be the way the whole culture is moving if you want to move in a sane direction.
Hear about Druid Heights? Was that what you were calling it, the place of the retreats or something? So I was curious about that. Yep. What is it?
Well, you can Google Druid Heights because now it's been written up in the New York Times, which has caused a whole lot of kerfuffle. Druid Heights was a community that Elsa Gidlow, Marcelena's and my spiritual grandmother, co-founded near Muir Woods in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. And it was this crazy, wild, what Elsa called semi-intentional community of all kinds of artists and writers and activists. And you had, I won't go into all the details, you can read about it online. And I lived there for a while. I spent a lot of time there. Actually, Ann Kent Rush and I, my mentor, we rented a tiny little, what was called a goat cabin from Elsa for $75 a month. And we would take turns going out there. It was in the middle of thousands of acres of what now is parkland. And it was half an hour from San Francisco. It was phenomenal. So you had Dizzy Gillespie and you had Alan Watts and you had Elsa Gidlow and you had just all these people there at different times and sometimes at the same time, all together. So it was this dynamic, to me, pretty idyllic and sometimes a very controversial place to be because there was some conflict amongst the different parties. So that's what Druid Heights was, yeah. And it's now no longer exists. It's the Park Service has taken it over. It's all of the exquisite buildings are falling down. There's still a couple people that live there. They get to live there till they die.
A question online says, for Hallie, if you could repeat the name of the female and the women's spiritual activity she runs in Santa Fe.
I heard something about Santa Fe. I think that's Visually Hamilton you're asking about. So World Wheel, WORLD, WHEEL. I highly recommend Visually Hamilton's book, World Wheel. And also, if you can go there and ask her about doing a retreat with her or an art retreat. She's an incredible person. She's been a Vedanta nun since she was 12 years old. And just to give you a little flavor of, and visually, and kindest, sweetest person. And she's now 85, so go see her while she's still with us.
Cheryl, I'm curious, in this extraordinary creative time that your leadership is so inspiring. I'm wondering how psyche, through dreams, what the role of dreams was for each of you in that time. Your dreams. What role did your dreams play?
During that time, for me, the dreams definitely took on Inanna Ereshkigal, dealing with the dark. And as a therapist, most of my clients were having dreams of the sacred feminine, whether it was through the deer or oftentimes animal dreams. But for me, a lot of the heroine's journey came out of my clients' dreams. So, yeah.
One of the amazing things that I was blessed to be part of in the early days in the Bay Area was in 1973, I started taking a weekly women's dream group with Alice Barbanel Rice. And she lived in the downstairs of my house, yeah. And she had studied the Sonoy, if any of you all know the Sonoy dream method, which may or may not really the Sonoy have done, but I don't think it matters because it's such a powerful way of working with dreams, where you complete a dream to its positive conclusion. You don't try to figure it out. You don't the meaning or anything. You just energetically work with it. And I use that, and then I started doing that every morning for an hour for years to complete my dreams, and then they start affecting your waking life. And then I started teaching that in my classes, and then I started adding the level of improvisational theater, and that was really trippy, where we would get together and somebody would tell their dream, and we would enact it, but anybody could change it at any time until it ultimately, sometimes I think this is not going to work in the middle, but then it would work out to a complete, to a harmonious completion. And I love that way of approaching dreams because it takes it beyond the mind and even beyond the human into the energetic. And I realized only about a number of years ago that how much of my personal life and my work had been as a result of dreams. And that was not conscious, even though I was doing that for decades, to finally honor my dreams and say, okay, I'm going to, really make even, more time. Who knows what's going on? There's a lot more going on than we know about.
Thank you, all of you. It's just been a fascinating morning. I really appreciate everything you've been saying. We're living in an age that's getting darker. And we're living in a time that, in my observation, is getting darker, not only in our country, but in the world of politics. And it almost seems like even in our country, they're using the Taliban playbook for some of their legislations against women. Disempowering women, taking away their health possibilities, etc. And if you can elaborate more on what you've already been talking about, which is how to combat that or how to rise above that or call a BS when it is, I'd appreciate more commentary about how to work against that kind of censorship and what I notice in young people, young students, self-censorship in writers' workshops and whatnot, where they won't talk about certain things because they're afraid of being censored, and about bodily functions or about sexuality or about art. It's a dark time, and I'd like to hear from you about your response to darkness.
As Lance said, I was announcing to everybody that I was going on sabbatical last year, and I was going to be on sabbatical. And then when I died, people would say, "Oh, she's on sabbatical." But then the election happened, and well, I had focused really a lot on voter rights, not necessarily specific candidates, but voter rights was really important to me. I'd focused a lot on that. So this is really, I'm like, this is something I put most of my energy into. And I feel like a lot of different things. It can go either way. And it's up to us and what we do in any time. And that's what I said about, I hope we can take the courage from what all of us have had times where we've leapt beyond what we were raised to do, what we were told was okay, and become even more extraordinary now. We don't know what's going to happen, but it's up to us. I do think it could be an incredible death rebirth. I know it could be an incredible death rebirth. Whether it will, I don't know, but I hold that as the reality. And I think what we hold in our minds as a possibility helps manifest it. And so that's why I started writing. I never thought I'd write a blog. I am writing a blog. I can't believe it. Because I was like, okay, people can do this. And I read different newsletters. And I know a lot of people aren't going to read Bob Reich and, these, Robert Hubble and stuff. So I read them and I synthesize it. And I'm like, okay, but you can do this, because I'm always like, you can do it. You can do it. We can do it. So that's what I mean. I mean, that's extraordinary for me. And these things are a lot of work. And then Trent Marilee, who's back there at the table, she has been helping me, edit them and get them out and all this stuff. And I've gotten a good response. I never thought I would do anything like that. But it's just what I felt like I had to do, because I love this planet. I love life. I love people. I love, everything. So, and they're not going to take it away from me. If I have anything to say about it.
I just want to respond to your saying that young people are feeling scared or feeling shut down. I teach memoir, and what I'm doing and what the women that I work with are doing is really working not to silence our voices. So acknowledging the fact that we have been silenced before out of fear of what people are going to think of us, and supporting each other to move past that, whether it's about their own personal abuse or their connection to their bodies. But I see that as the one thing I can do. Politically, probably everyone knows about writing postcards. It does work. I think that we were very successful in getting the success in Wisconsin this past week. And I really do think that was because of all of the postcards people are writing in their kitchen. So those types of practical things.
And also calling your congressperson. It's part of my speech that I didn't say. What I wrote is, if you have never called your congressperson before, or not in a while, now is a good time too. Or writing a letter. They don't usually hear from us. Now they are. And also the demonstrations are important, because people say that the courts, the judges who are also doing some good things, they see that people are out in the streets. If there's nobody out in the streets, they think, oh, well, people don't care that much. But they see that people do care. So anything and everything.
Call your congressperson daily. Seriously.
That's your new spiritual practice.
That's a good way to look at it. I'm, coming back to your phrase about the disempowerment of women, and, from this perch of all these decades now, and I've been looking at the world and involved in it, it seems like it's things that seem to be achieved are really a holding pattern. And the ecological critique of the dominant culture and the feminist critique were two profoundly deep critiques that just rumble the, foundations of it. So it seems so many things we thought had been achieved. It's like, well, you win for now, but we'll get you later. And that's to see that, that struggle always going on. And I just read the other day that high school girls, middle school girls in England don't feel safe from the boys after COVID because the boys spent COVID watching violent porn and this manosphere stuff, and they trash talk their female teachers, and they refuse to read any literature by women. And it's like, who would have thought that, could have happened? We had this more egalitarian culture. I mean, these are simple justice issues that, everyone can have opportunities who can do the work. And it's like there's always this something coming up and pulling things backwards. So, as Hallie says, this is not over by a long shot, but you have to see that it's always an ongoing struggle, to get egalitarian situations, and then it really has to be guarded. And that wasn't, the case. I mean, these kids were just sucked into some other way of being and seeing the world, and they're pretty wrecked, a lot of them now, and that's really sad. So anyway, just, be gloriously old and understand the cycles and get on to the next one.
I just want to say, I love the phrase that I quoted, and I think it was from a Native American teacher. It said, "You may not finish the work, but the work is always sacred." And there's an old Hebrew saying about it is not up to you to finish the work, but you must not abandon it.
How do you see the slow, intentional suppression of the feminine energy divine? How was this achieved? Mary seems like a watered-down version of the feminine divine.
Well, Mary is not the only image of the divine. And to many people, you can speak to that. Well, but she's still alive.
I don't understand how she's watered down. She's existed for more than 2,000 years as a strong image in so many different cultures. So there's nothing watered down about Mary. As I said in my talk, just think about how many Marys have 1 million pilgrims each year. I mean, she's really, in a sense, the archetypal feminine for so many cultures. So definitely not watered down. And she keeps appearing. Like, I love the fact that the Paleolithic image is holding the bison, and then we see it holding up the Guadalupe. I mean, the image of the divine feminine just keeps moving through the centuries. So I think the question was, were those earlier images stronger? That's okay. No.
As somebody who spent a lot of time researching images, I'll say that when I first started in the mid-'70s, there was one book that you could get images from, and that was Eric Neumann's, and they were black and white, and they were from Europe. So I think now is a time where you can choose your goddess, or goddess is plural. You can choose your images of the sacred feminine. It's like whatever works for you at whatever time in your life, because it's all makes one goddess. one aspect of the divine feminine. We don't want to divide them all up into little pieces. That it's all a whole. And thank goodness now we have so much more research and so much availability for all over the world. And when I did The Heart of the Goddess, it was pre-internet, but things would come to me, even though I lived way on the edge of the continent. So she's around, she's alive, and draw her yourself or sculpt her yourself.
Just one last thing, like there are 400 Black Madonnas just in France. 400. So she's a busy gal.